My message this morning is entitled Mental Health Realities and the Benefits of Spirituality. So far this year, in the U.S., there have been more mass shootings than the number of days. That's right, more than one a day. And anytime that there is a mass shooting in America, there is a reasonably good chance that one of the deflection techniques that will be used to keep us from focusing on the very necessary and very reasonable idea of gun control, not gun elimination, but reasonable gun control, is the question of whether or not the shooter had some form of a mental disability. Even though it tends not to be, it should be somewhat surprising that when this does happen, very few of us hear much about becoming more informed and more aware about mental health. Truthfully, it's a sad statement. It's a sad statement on the issue of mental health in the U.S. Despite the fact that 1 in 5 American adults experienced a mental health issue. Despite the fact that 1 in 10 young people experienced a period of major depression. Despite the fact that 1 in 25 Americans lived with a serious mental illness such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or major depression. We are either afraid or reluctant to, or maybe just indifferent about talking about mental health. Which is strange. Just strange when you consider that the numbers I just shared alone are enough to have someone make it clear that we have someone in our lives that is dealing with a serious mental health issue. This aversion to talk about mental health may be particularly true in spiritual communities. I'm not sure if it's because mental health wasn't a concept when most religions' sacred texts were written, or if it's too uncomfortable to be talked about in polite company, or if it's something altogether different. I'm not sure. What I do know is that in general, we just don't talk about mental health much. Now, honestly, if I'm being completely even-handed about this, we also tend to not talk much about it in polite society in general. So the seemingly popular bashing of spiritual communities for not talking about spiritual health is truthfully, that's not very fair at all. The reality is that most people, in most places, tend to avoid talking about mental health. Now, for a variety of reasons, that is an unfortunate reality. One of those reasons is related to spirituality, and we're going to get to that in just a few minutes. But first, I'd like to look briefly at one of the other reasons that it is unfortunate. The reason is the misinformation that is out there that could be corrected by having more open conversations about mental health. Now, the first piece of misinformation I'd like to talk about is very important when you consider the rash of shooting violence in the U.S. As I mentioned earlier, frequently those covering the shootings very quickly begin to suggest that the shooter may have had a mental health issue. And you may have noticed that this is particularly true when they are white. The implication here is that people who struggle with mental health and mental health issues are naturally somehow more violent than the rest of normal society. Nothing could be further from the truth. And I can't help but believe that if we talked about mental health with the same openness that we tend to talk about other illnesses, more society would be aware of it. The reality is that the vast majority of people with mental health problems are no more likely to be violent than anyone else. Most people with mental illnesses are not violent, and only something like 3 to 5% of the individuals who participate in violent acts are living with a serious mental illness. In fact, people with mental illnesses are over 10 times more likely to be victims of violent crime than the general population. Let me say that again. People with severe mental illnesses are over 10 times more likely to be victims of violent crime than the general population. Another piece of misinformation about mental health that's frequently assumed by folks who are less informed about it is the belief that personal weakness or character flaws cause mental health problems. Put differently, it's the false idea that people with mental health problems can just snap out of it if they try hard enough. The reality is that mental health problems have nothing to do with being lazy or weak. And many people need help to get better. Many factors contribute to mental health problems, including biological factors such as genes, physical illness, injury, brain chemistry, life experiences such as trauma or history of abuse, family history of mental health problems. As I mentioned, 1 in 5 American adults experienced a mental health issue. 1 in 10 young Americans experience a period of major depression. 1 in 25 Americans live with a serious mental issue such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, major depression. You probably know someone with a mental health problem and don't even realize it, because many people with mental health problems are highly active and productive members of our communities. As a matter of fact, I guarantee you that you know someone with a mental illness. I mean, just look at the folks sitting next to you. But seriously, I guarantee you that you know someone with a mental health issue because you know me. I have major depressive disorder and mild anxiety disorder. Although some days I wonder why they called it minor, because it feels a lot worse. For many folks, this is a surprise. Not only because I've managed, for the most part, to be a highly functioning and productive person, despite suffering from major depressive disorder, but also because we tend to think of ministers as mentally and emotionally even killed. But the sad reality is that 1 in 4 ministers, 1 in 4, have struggled with or are currently struggling with mental illness. Now, what that means for me most days is that I will probably struggle with feeling overwhelmed by something. Frequently for me, it's something that might have a strong emotional component, but it can be something as simple as calling someone that I don't know. And while to some degree we all deal with feeling overwhelmed by something on a nearly daily basis, major depressive disorder and anxiety disorder can sort of amplify those feelings to the point of basically shutting the person down. My struggle, and the struggle for those with similar diagnoses, is to manage the anxiety and the depression well enough that it doesn't have to have a heavy impact on my life. Therapy and medication have helped me immensely with that. except when they don't. Because sometimes they don't. Sometimes the darkness wins out. You begin to shut down and to withdraw. Anxiety wraps itself around your head and around your heart, and most things seem like they're either too overwhelming or just not worth it. It makes no sense at all. I suspect it's a bit like Jonah felt when he tried to express his situation in today's scripture. Frequently you even intellectually recognize the ridiculousness of it all, but the feeling remains, and it tends to control you until it finally is over. I've also experienced having someone in my life attempt suicide multiple times because of mental illness. I've had a person I knew well self-medicate to the point of me needing to go over to their house and clean them up, including getting dirt and feces out from under their fingernails, check them into behavioral health clinic. I've actually spent weeks visiting my own child in that same clinic, and I've even served as the chairman of the board for the Presbyterian Counseling Center. Now, I share all of that. To say I am very familiar with mental health issues. Frankly, I'm more familiar than I ever wanted to be. And that is a big part of why the topic is so important to me. It's also one of the many reasons that spirituality is also important to me. So let me explain that part. Let's do a little history first. Historically, there's been a notable disagreement and conflict even between psychiatry and spirituality. As psychiatry was emerging as a field of study, as a discipline, religion was labeled as problematic. See, in 1907, Sigmund Freud described religion as a universal obsessional neurosis. Pretty strong words. Freud's stance was widely adopted then by other psychologists, which further ensured psychiatry's position as mostly unfriendly to religion, which caused many clergy to perceive psychiatry as anti-Christian and therefore kind of dangerous. Now, ultimately, the antagonism between psychiatry and religion persisted through most of the 20th century. But in the last 30 years or so, American psychiatry has evolved towards a sort of more positive and respective stance about religion and spirituality. And that's partly due because of an increased appreciation for the significance of a patient's culture, as well as an increasing evidence that religion and spirituality can have beneficial effects in mental health. The new trend in psychology is so strong that in 2011, about 79% of U.S. medical schools offered some variation of spirituality in their curriculum. And of those, 75% of the schools required medical students to take at least one course in spirituality. Well, for me, that begs the question, what are some of these beneficial effects that spirituality can have on healthcare or mental health? But research has shown that spirituality tends to have a positive influence on patients' overall quality of life. As a matter of fact, spirituality has been associated with lower levels of depression symptoms, fewer symptoms of post-traumatic stress, fewer eating disorder symptoms, fewer negative symptoms of schizophrenia, less perceived stress, lower rates of suicide, and less personality disorder. Studies also have shown that, not so surprisingly, positive religious coping methods like spiritual support, positive religious reframing of stressors and spiritual connectedness are significantly connected with and predictive of better mental health and psychological well-being. Specifically, positive religious coping correlates with reductions in depression and anxiety. And not only that, individuals suffering from mental illness appear to benefit from being surrounded by a supportive religious community. Attending religious services regularly have been shown to protect against major depression and is associated with a decreased suicide rate. And additionally, greater frequency of religious attendance correlates with less distress and negative life events. The reality simply is that study after study has shown that spiritual beliefs and practices may help people to better cope with stressful life circumstances and give them comfort, meaning a sense of control and hope. Spiritual involvement correlates with better mental health in the areas of suicide, depression, substance abuse. Belief in some form of God, but not necessarily a religious affiliation, has been associated with better psychiatric treatment outcomes. Individuals with a positive and accepting image of God demonstrate fewer anxiety and depressive symptoms. And similarly, belief in a benevolent God is associated with less social anxiety, paranoia, obsession, and compulsion. Because of my own diagnosis and my life experiences with mental illness, mental health is a really important topic to me. Specifically, I am very interested in understanding what tools best help and manage mental health. As a matter of fact, in my personal life, obviously, it's essential. In truth, there are many effective tools in managing mental health issues. As a person who suffers from mental health illness, as a minister, and considering the long adversarial relationship between psychology and spirituality, I am thrilled to see academic research investigating the relationship between mental health and spirituality. I hope that it encourages many of us to recognize the mental health benefits of this community. And at the very least, I hope it encourages us to be more open and comfortable with talking about mental health, and as a result, make this spiritual community an even better place than it already is for the 1 in 5 people in the U.S. that have experienced a mental health issue, just like